Hey everybody, George here with Wine Industry Network. Welcome to another episode of our Win Insider Series. I'm super excited. I've got Rebecca Hopkins with us today, who is the founder of Rebecca Hopkins Wine. She's a wine marketing and communication strategy specialist and founder of A Balanced Glass, which I definitely want to chat with you a little bit about. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, George. Thanks for the opportunity. It's nice to see you.
So I always say this all the time. It's like, so half the time I'm interviewing people that I don't really know at all, and sometimes I meet people that I've spent a lot of time with, I know quite well, and either way, it's very cool. You're kind of in the middle, so we know each other. We've done some things together, but we're not like, we haven't really hung out a lot. So I've been looking forward to this one.
Me too. Me too.
We actually have a lot of friends in common, which is neat. So you've done a lot of different things. You've had a nice long career. So I just thought it would be interesting to kind of go explore your journey a little bit. And like I said, we'll just go from there. So you were born and raised in McLaren Vale, South Australia.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about that. What was that like?
We weren't in the wine business. That's the first thing I'll say. My family were never even really wine drinkers until I studied at University of Adelaide, and I studied wine business.
Yeah.
So we didn't really have a lot to do with McLaren Vale, other than my dad built the bar at the football club.
Okay.
And my dad played for the Crushers, and I used to have to sit in the car freezing my tush off in winter while dad ran around playing Aussie rules. But we knew, obviously we knew the wine business was there, of course, because there was lots of people with the last name of the wineries, and you'd see grape trucks in harvest, and, everything was around. And my family home is they're about 10 minutes north of McLaren Vale itself.
Okay.
I have a house in McLaren Vale, just off the main street. And so we kind of always had this wine thing around us, but I actually wanted to be a geologist. That's what I wanted to do.
I read that was your what you were like looking to study. And then you said, I saw in an interview, you said, I wasn't smart enough, so I decided to go into wine or whatever. So how did you make that transition?
Well, I think, geology is a very sought after career in Australia, right? Because of the mining industry. And for me, my fascination was always with earth science. And that was always my love. It was never about winemaking. I've never wanted to be a winemaker. I've never wanted to kind of be in that part of the business. And so when I saw wine as an option, it's adjacent, right? It's an earth science. There's a lot of similarities. And as we know now, well, as I know now through my career, so much intelligence is in the earth.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'll do it. I'll study wine, and then I'll be able to go into something else. And then, my first week of living on campus at Roseworthy. So this was when Adelaide University still had that ag college out in the Barossa. And so I was, living in the Vale and driving to the Barossa Valley. And I got offered a job in McLaren Vale at Wirra Wirra Winery. And my interview was basically, I went down, the gentleman at the time, Zar Brooks, was the cellar door manager. And he handed me this white wine glass and said, "What is this?" And I went, "I think it's Riesling." And he went, "Great, you've got the job. Get behind the bar. There's a bus of 30 people about to arrive."
So right into the tasting room.
So literally, yeah. And I fell in love. It's hard not to fall in love with this business. It's why it's all I've ever done. But I think particularly when you really are frontline, you start that frontline role where you are hearing feedback firsthand, you're seeing, you're unpacking pallets, you're jumping out of the way while, harvest trucks arrive or tanks are being cleaned. So, yeah.
No, it's funny when I read a little bit about that, and I could definitely relate to your story, because I grew up on the East Coast. And I moved out had a business degree, and I moved to California, and I went up in Healdsburg after school. I was kind of doing this California adventure. I loved the area, but I didn't know much about wine. And so my first job was at a little tiny winery out in Dry Creek, Lake Sonoma Winery.
Mm-hmm.
And my first job was, I didn't know anything. And they said, "Well, we can't pay you very much, but we'll teach you everything we know." And I was, okay, well, that sounds fair, because I really like living here. And so, yeah, it was, right, just like you, behind the tasting room bar. And then when needed, I spent a lot of time in the vineyard. when it was time to, get out there and prune or do repairs.
Mhm.
Obviously helped with harvest. When we were bottling, it was like all hands on deck, for bottling, and everything was done by hand. It was just same thing we do with the big wineries. It was just much, much smaller operation. And it was just it really helped me out. And I'm sure it helped you out because, as you progress through your career, you kind of, at least you knew a little something about what was happening in the different areas of the winery.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I think when you see, and we talk a lot about this, right? This kind of buzzword of authenticity. But when you see like a ferment go wrong, or grapes don't arrive, or there's a frost, or there's a rain, you really see the reality of the business
Yeah.
that doesn't always come through because there's that conflict, right, between well, what I want my brand to do, but what the reality of the situation really
Yeah.
is. So I
Yeah.
think when you have that lived experience, you can really help
No,
contextualize these conversations for people.
and I agree with you. And it's not the glamorous part of what we do, right? But it's the necessary part of what we do. And in some ways, it's funny. I was thinking about, as I was preparing for the interview, when I first started, just like where you grew up. Now, I didn't grow up here, but I got here like my early 20s. And as I was living here, there were a lot of people whose family owned wineries and they grew up around it. I was also, it's very competitive, and I just felt like it was such a disadvantage, and I was just so far behind the curve. I was never going to catch up. But over time, I think it actually helped me because I think that I had a lot more in common with the consumers that we're trying to attract. The people that would come into the tasting room and say, especially early on, they go, "Hey, I don't know anything about wine, but we're visiting San Francisco and we thought we'd spend a day up in wine country." And I was like, "Cool, I can relate to you." And I just I try to make it as easy for them as possible and strip away all the things that I think are somewhat intimidating that we do as
Mhm.
an industry that kind of pushes people away. Um,
Yep.
did you feel like not having grown up with wine on your table every day turned out to be maybe like an advantage at some point in your career?
It was both, right? Because I think to your point, I was very much about the experience, and I think that's honestly how I've spent the second half of my career in communications, because I really believe that wine is alive and it needs to be experienced, and it's part of culture and history and all the good things. So sometimes it was a disadvantage if you're in a group of a bunch of wine people and you're the other, and you can't tell the difference between Blewett Springs and McLaren Flat Shiraz. There's a judgment that comes with that, right?
Yeah,
But again, when you're in front of a consumer or a wine lover who just wants to share their story with you about wine,
yeah,
you find different ways to connect with them, whether it's their travels, whether it's the food they grew up with, whether they grew up with, wine on their table, and part of their kind of culture. So it was both for me, and definitely um, helped me when I was, say, at a large company like Constellation Brands, where, a brand like Woodbridge by Robert Mondavi really wasn't about sense of place. It was about the story, the man, the brand, right? So,
yeah.
yeah, it worked both ways. I also, worked with some very, very small high end Italian wineries where if you don't have your wine chops, it's found out pretty quick smart, you know?
So talk a little bit about your journey on getting to the point where you felt like you could converse about wine with some of those folks that you're referencing right now.
I still can't. I
Yeah.
mean, I think when you think you know everything about wine, I think you really don't.
Yeah.
It's part of the beauty of it. I would
Yeah.
say, like, I was listening to Liz's interview. I've never aspired to be a master of wine or a master sommelier or a master in that world because it's not how I'm wired. I'm not a good academic student in that way. I learn by doing. And for me, surrounding myself and immersing myself, traveling as much as I can, tasting as much as I can, and also having my own sense about the wines, even as a professional, where my guardrails are on faults or where my stylistic preferences are on alcohol or things like that. So then being able to have a position from that point of view, um, because you'll always meet someone who know a heck of a lot more than you, in my experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so
No, I can relate.
I've never thought of myself as an expert, and I still don't.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel the same way. I got to a point where like you, I was never going to immerse myself in in studying wine to that level. I just couldn't do it. I just can't. It's too
Yeah.
much. But I definitely got comfortable enough to know what I liked and what I didn't
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
And maybe more importantly, I knew enough. I mean, I knew enough about the business. I knew enough.
Yeah.
But I also got comfortable and okay with like asking questions about things I didn't know. And I share this one experience that was really helped me out a lot. And I had already been in the industry for a bunch of years, but for more family owned. So I worked for Corbell, and there was Gary Heck. Worked for the Terlato family. There was Tony Terlato was a person at the end, and then I worked for Jim Beam Wine Estates when they had their wine division, and they had just bought half of Valley Domecq. So we were kind of all this big coming together thing. And I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about acquisitions a little bit later. But I remember sitting at a tasting. I think we were doing like Bordeaux blends, and it was all of the winemakers from all the different wineries. It was like 12 head winemakers, and plus our like I think like Nick Goldschmidt and Daryl Groom, a couple of our bigger guys, the head winemakers, and then their assistants and some of the lab guys and all the marketing guys, right? And it was like 30 of us, right, doing this big tasting. Maybe it was like a flight of like 12 wines, and then we're gonna like rank our wines and talk about why. And I was just like, I mean, I knew what I liked, but I was like, this is intimidating. Like, I know this is like, I'm certain I am going to be completely opposite of everybody here. This is just too much. So we go through the tasting. We all do our personal rankings, and sure enough, as we're kind of going down, I mean, even the winemakers could not get on the same page. Everybody was just all over the place, right? Now the wines were all good, but everyone was all over the place, and it was like an aha moment for me, because at that point I go, you know what? There is no one right or wrong answer. I mean, if there's something flawed, yes, but it gave me a lot of confidence after that. I think going like, you know what? These guys can't even agree on, and they definitely know what they're doing. I'm okay with liking what I like and being okay with it.
Yeah. And I think it keeps you in the consumer seat. At the end of the day, this is what in a role like mine, that's my job, right? Is we need to make sure the consumer is coming back to wine as a category, the either the brands or the regions we represent, and it's wine that's well made and has a story. And I think it's a benefit to stay in that seat, because then wine is a discovery product. It's what in my world. And so you bring someone to wine, they fall in love. It also reminds you how you fell in love, why you fell in love. And then it gives you the ability to really connect with them and bring them in to wine as a category.
Yeah.
Which is important to me, very important to me.
Yeah. And I think you touched on something. A lot of times it's not even so much about being able to recall exactly what that particular wine tasted like, but remembering that experience, right? And like, it's the culmination of the wine is sort of part of that experience.
Yeah.
And that's what resonates with people. And I talk about that a lot, even still. I mean, it's common sense. You would think it's common sense when you talk about, the experience that people have when they visit these different properties. They often don't go back, 2 or 3 years later and go, oh, I had such an awesome time at pick a winery. I loved, this. They just remember being there. They remember learning something. They might remember a little bit about the person they interacted with. And the wine is just sort of helps fuels that experience, but it's not actually the particular wine that they recall.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote about an interesting topic I think is getting a lot of play right now, right, which is non-alcohol. And I wrote about the role of non-alcoholic drinks in tasting rooms. And it's not saying you have to go and make one. It's saying, what do you have for people who are not consuming the product? Because the beauty of coming to a tasting room, it's probably in a very spectacular part of the world. It's going to have people who really love what they do, who make a great product. And, we work in the alcohol industry. So there's probably someone we would hope that wasn't drinking when they were driving, above all, right? And so, but it's that I call it radical hospitality. It shouldn't be radical, but it's that exceptional hospitality, because you and I have been to tasting rooms where we remember meeting the person. Yeah. Someone took extra care of us. Someone made an allowance for us. Someone packed that bottle. It was a hot day. They made sure it wouldn't be temperature affected in the trunk of the car. And so I think tasting rooms specifically, they're just more than selling the product that we make.
Absolutely. And, it's funny, you made me think about something, these conversations I would have as I was kind of progressing through my career about um, that there are times when I think upper level sort of take for granted those folks that are in a tasting room.
Yeah.
I mean, they just go, tasting room guys. But oh my God, they're the front line, right? They're representing our brand. And to your point, if you don't have the right people in there, you can create a terrible experience for somebody and have them just be turned off for good, right? And I think we've gotten better as an industry about that. But I think there's still some folks out there that are guilty of just not recognize how important those people in the tasting room are.
Yeah, and also how important it is they know the real story. Because I think, as we know, there's a lot of misinformation out there around wineries, winery ownership, who does what, blah, blah, blah. And I think they are frontline. They are the face of your brand.
Yeah.
They need to be trained. They need leadership support. They need engagement, because people who love who they work for, they work harder, right? They're more loyal. They show up. And you have at the end of it a beautiful product that's been made with love. So I think they're really important. I think tasting rooms and salespeople, anyone in that kind of sales, promotions, communications function, we're kind of the mouthpiece.
Yeah, absolutely. No question about it. What's a good segue to my next question I wanted to ask you. So as you started, you get out of school and now you're working in the wine industry, you're really on the sales side before you got on the communication side. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I had a quick little segue. I fell in love with an oyster farmer and I moved to Tasmania. That's not my resume. And then I was watching the Aurora Australis, like the Antarctic exploration vessel.
Yeah.
The Don Tricosto Channel into Hobart. And I was pulling up these racks with someone I didn't like very much. And I was like, what am I doing here? Like, I studied wine. So I came home.
Wait a second, you were an oyster farmer?
I was engaged to an oyster farmer, yeah.
Were you out there helping out? You were pulling up?
Oh, yeah. I can carry a 50-kilo bag of uneopened oysters, George.
Can you shuck some oysters?
And I can drive a truck.
Can you shuck some oysters?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
See, I'm learning something about you. All right,
we'll come and do it one day. We'll go up to
going. Yes,
I
love it. All right, so you're going, okay, what am I doing here? Then
came home and had a great opportunity to join Negociants Australia, which is Robert Hill Smith's Yalumba Wines. It was his import division. So they had a marketing agency and import agency, and I was a marketing assistant, split between the domestic portfolio of agencies and the international wines.
Okay.
So from really early in my career, one of my jobs was to pick up Angelo Gaia from the Adelaide airport. I had no idea who this guy was. Yeah. I just grabbed a Wine Spectator with him on the cover. And I showed up at the airport, and off the plane steps this like impeccably beautiful, like Italian man. And I'm I'm in, like I'm sold. And we represented 40, 50 of the greatest wine families. And of course, being owned by Yalumba and that multi-generational Hill Smith story. So that was awesome. I did that for a couple of years. And then I studied and won the Vin de Champagne Award. I was the first student in Australia to win that. And that got me to work for Hathaway Estate, which was the only sparkling wine house in Hathaway, South Australia, which is the middle of absolutely nowhere, 200 people in the population. And I was the full-time employee. So we did it all. That's great. And then a quick jump over to Rymel.
What was the award you won? Tell me the award you won.
Oh, the Vin de Champagne Award. It's run every year by it's the CIVC, the Committee of Champagne. And there's a professional winner, a non-professional winner, and a student winner. And unfortunately, they don't do this anymore. I think they stopped maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But I was still studying because I was still finishing my grad studies. And I was like, I had a week and a half to enter. Everyone told me I wouldn't win it, which if you know anything about me, if you tell me I can't do something, I'm going to do it. And I studied my tush off and under a woman called Pam Dunsford, who had won the first Churchill Scholarship. She worked at Krug. She was the first female to work in the cellars at Champagne Krug. And she was tough and she was brutal. And I rang her and said, I think I want to do this. And she's like, come to my house tonight. So I showed up and she gave me a stack of books about this high on champagne. And I studied and I won the state entry, which was written.
Wow.
And then the national award was a blind tasting and an interview. I rang my mom and said, I'm going to Paris. None of my family have ever been overseas. None of my family except for me at that point. And yeah, so I got to do a 2 week study tour in Champagne. And the Vin de Champagne Award is a very common, it's common now. You'll see a lot of people, and there are varying levels of the
Yeah.
order. But yeah, I still have my medal.
That's incredible. So that led you. So all right. So I interrupted you. So you were telling a story. So now
Okay.
you're in the middle of nowhere. 200 people.
Yeah, I was living between Melbourne and Pathway,
Yeah.
so 4 hours away, and did that for a couple of years, and then joined Rymal Coonawarra, which was the Rymal family, and then I stepped into a sales and marketing international role, and that was a 2.5 years split between Coonawarra and Melbourne, and then I moved back to Adelaide, and Hardy Wine Company, BRL Hardy Accolade Wines,
Yeah.
came and said, there's this PR manager job. I've never done PR. I just figured it was sales,
Yeah.
and stepped into that role as domestic public relations manager under an amazing gentleman called Jim Humphreys, who really, really taught me about the importance of humans in wine. He was an incredible diplomat, a generous man, and we rode the wave of the growth of BRL Hardy into Hardy Wine Company, and
Yeah.
then the joint venture with Constellation, and then the acquisition of us by Constellation, and we became the Hardy Wine Company. Then we became Constellation Brands Australia, and then in '07, it was late '06 actually, the Constellation Brands team in the US asked me to come and join Constellation Brands as their VP of public relations and events.
I mean, you had a lot going on in that period of time.
Yeah.
What was it like for you when you first switched from, out there on the sales and marketing side to being on the communication side? And it was great. You had a terrific mentor, but there had to be some real learning, right? Because it's a whole
Oh, yeah.
new group of influencers, right? For lack of a better media that you needed to
Mm.
establish relationships with. Talk a little bit about, I mean, how hard was that for you?
I think you have to love people and you have to love listening,
Yeah.
and I think you have to be prepared just to shut up, um, because to be successful in communications, it's about listening, and it really is about identifying what your client needs or what your customer needs. So
Hmm.
that's very similar to sales, right? You don't go into a boutique wine store and try and sell them bulk juice.
Yeah.
So a lot of my sales training got me really ready for that. And the beauty of being at a small winery like Rymal as their international representative, I'd go into a Tesco meeting and talk about like going into the lion's den. You're meeting with these people and you have to learn to be adaptable, to listen, to be forthright, to close the sale. It's your one meeting a year. And so
Yeah.
it stood me in really good stead to kind of pivot over to a comms role where I'm not going to say no winemaker really thinks they need PR, but a lot of producers back then didn't really think they needed someone to help tell their story, right? And
Right.
in Australia, it was very much production driven industry. We make the wine, someone goes and sells it.
Right.
So getting buy-in from winemakers, getting them to make what we were doing a priority, and getting the real story out of them rather than just the pH and the TA and the pick dates.
Right.
So it's hard if you don't want to learn. If you're not curious, it's not a career for you. And
Hmm.
if you're not willing to do what you say you're going to do, that's the biggest downfall that a lot of people suffer. I think in sales, obviously, as well.
Yeah.
But to be a comms professional, you really have to deliver.
Yeah.
Because it's not like you have a sales report at the end of the month that says what you sold.
No, I agree. I mean, I think it also requires a lot of patience,
Yeah, of course.
because these things don't happen overnight, right? You
Yeah.
don't change a brand reputation overnight, right? It takes
No.
time. It takes a lot of strategic thinking. I think you've got to have some patience with the winemakers and the marketing team, even though you're kind of the extension of the marketing team. And I think sometimes, and just from my personal experience and just observing some of the people who I really respect out there who live in your world, sometimes you got to deliver the real truth. Like, hey, this isn't working. Hey, I know the wine's good, but that's not good enough, right? And that has to be challenging sometimes
Yeah.
because you're dealing with, the wine industry is full of these dream chasers that have experienced a lot of success, whether it's at wine or something before wine, and now they just think that they know everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're the guy who's got to tell them, hey, here's
Oh,
the
yeah.
deal.
Well, yeah, particularly when you're absolutely, and thank you for saying that because I think it's absolutely true when you start dealing in luxury wine.
Yeah.
And that is a big lesson. You have to get a lot of courage. You also have to know your facts and you have to know the market because in smaller regions where say an international region that's lesser known, their understanding of the market, particularly as an import coming into the US, is their own region, right? So I am a Douro producer and therefore I know my Douro competition. But if they don't understand the context of the sheer number of people trying to get their appointment with Eric Asimov or a sit-down tasting at Wine Spectator or Enthuse, they have no comprehension. And so you not only have to be the unpopular one that says that wine's not going to show well because I know my media customer, or I know you think that's really important news, but that's actually not.
Yeah.
Or I know this is the best wine you made, but in this category, that's not the lead horse we should be talking about.
Yeah.
And that's trust. That's years and years of building trust with people on both sides, because you have to have the trust of your client who's going to say, you don't know what you're talking about or whatever, or I trust you. Well, then you got to turn around and pitch that to the press contact. And they're short on time.
Yeah.
The editors are probably yelling at them.
Right.
Often don't have, they're just, unless there's a story in it for them, it's not worth their time. So you have to also kind of play that, okay, now I've got the buy-in from the client. Now I've got to get the buy-in from the customer. And then you got to put it all together. And then you have no control over the results.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you do, the world that you live in, is just so hard because you've got to have that sales experience you've had. You've got to have a little bit of that persistence in you because you got to keep going after these guys, right? So they're not getting back to you. They're blowing you off. So you've got to have thick skin on dealing with the media. You have to understand their audience and trends and things that their audience could potentially be interested in. And then you got to keep up with what's happening back at the winery property and the nuances there and the personalities there. I mean, it's a juggling act what you do. I don't know how you do it.
Well, you got to read a lot. You got to read a lot of stuff. That's the other thing. You've got to really read these for press. You have to read what they're writing.
Yeah,
it's like the foundational thing. Do what you say you're going to do and read about them, because if you tried to pitch Dave McIntyre right now and you thought he was still at the Washington Post and you didn't realize he's got his own Substack, which is awesome.
Correct.
You look foolish. He's never Dave's a nice guy, but he's not going to turn around and be like, hey, George.
Yeah.
You missed that one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so how much of your day is dedicated to just keeping up with what people are writing?
A lot. The beauty and the sorrow of social media is you get to see where everyone is and who's doing what, which really helps. Hey, such and such, I've noticed you're in Spain right now. Let me follow up next week. Or, hey, I'm really sorry to hear about, you've got an incident, or LA right now.
Yeah.
You're not pitching LA right now. It's not. So I spend a lot of time reading. I do it the first thing in the morning. I do it throughout the day, of course, because of the alerts, like your amazing news aggregator, where I get to cheat and pretend I've read all those articles together for me.
Like cliff notes, I know.
But, it is important. And I have always said this, no matter if my team was 15 people at Constellation or 2 people at Folio, you have to read the news. Yeah. That's your job. That's it. Okay. It's not always right. It's not always fair. It's not always accurate, but it is out there.
Yeah.
And I think the other time I spend that I don't think everyone spends time doing is correcting things that are wrong.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean?
If you have a client with a story and there's a factual inaccuracy, you have to correct it to the best of your ability. This isn't about correcting something you accidentally said. Working for the Mondavis for 12 years, I've corrected so many people that, Robert Mondavi did pass away. the man running Folio
Right.
is not Robert Mondavi. But there's that real, it's very basic and it sounds trite, but it's really important because of the online nature of what we do, it lives forever.
Yeah.
So if someone's quoting that your vineyard is 500 acres instead of 50, like that's out there. You have to correct that if it's not accurate.
Are those conversations difficult sometimes? I mean, because, there's a lot, we talk about egos on the winery side. The egos on the media side can be just as big and annoying.
Yeah, and that comes down to you as a professional to prepare both sides, right?
Yeah.
If you've delivered materials that are accurate, and there's an error, a lot of it's error. A lot of it, honestly, is error. And
Yeah.
99% of the conversations you have to have are super easy and they get fixed.
Yeah.
The challenges come when either the source information wasn't clear, i.e., the wine was named incorrectly online on Wine Searcher.
Yeah.
So the journalist on Deadline uses that as the reference, but it's not right. It's back on the brand. It's back on your winery. I don't believe in our industry, thankfully. It's malicious intent.
Right.
But the fact is, and Harvey Posett, who was the longtime communications lead for the Robert Mondavi Corporation, I had lunch with him twice before he passed away, and he said to me, Rebecca, there are two things you need to do. Number one, always make sure the facts are accurate. And number two, the day that journalists ring you is the day you've made it, but never get complacent. Like if people are ringing you because they're on deadline or they have something they need or they have an opportunity, he's like, you're in the trust.
Yeah.
Do not get complacent. And then he drank a bourbon and we had a great lunch.
So I was thinking about, I thought about a lot of things as I was preparing. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is just how different the media landscape is today compared to when you started. I mean, I don't know how many of the major newspapers, is like maybe one major newspaper or two major newspapers that actually have a dedicated, right? So New York Times and San Francisco Chronicle, that's all that's left, right?
That's it. Mm-hmm.
Well,
actually, that's not true. That's not true. 3, because you've got the Journal with Letty T.
Okay, 3. But I mean, how does that compare to what it was when you first ventured into your career, and how have you dealt with, because you had to evolve.
Oh yeah.
You've had to change the way that you think. Talk a little bit about that, because I'm super curious.
Yeah, and I would say that number of 3 is national pubs. Of course, you have a lot of regional news, like Sarah Doyle at the Press Democrat. Like there's lots of regional writers, but in terms of a national masthead, it's 3. And then of course you have, Food and Wine Magazine with Ray, Isle, and Max. But really for daily news, it's tiny. It was like 150 when I started. And so kind of to answer the question, you spend a lot more time chasing, because it's now by journalist, it's not by outlet.
Right.
And so you have to build your relationship with the journalist. And then obviously the channels have changed. It's no longer like you get your stack of magazines and newspapers and you get your clips, and then right now we've got podcasts, we've got obviously e-news, we've got lives, we've got socials, we've got YouTube, we've got all these channels. And again, if you can, a lot of the relationships with the people are the things that I hold dear. Because mastheads will change, right? We never thought Decanter 6 years ago would now have a US division. So it's a very British established outlet, let alone, Clive running the team. So to me, you have to adapt. You have to adapt to very, very short lead times. You have to be so much more prepared in terms of fact, and you have to have your supplier ready to both jump on an opportunity and say no, because a lot of what you manage is saying no, particularly when you're in conversations that are nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
Like, oh, a journalist is on deadline for this and they want a spokesperson on insert controversial topic. Sometimes your job is to be like, actually, that's not the topic for you, because you might not see the news here and it might be a local little regional paper, but this in 10 minutes, it can be syndicated, MSN, Google
Yeah.
News, Reuters. I mean, the age of syndication is a game changer in our world. Um, so number one, also helping know what those syndications kind of look like. And I'll pick on Dave McIntyre again, right? Because
Yeah.
a story could run in the San Francisco Chronicle and then it's in the Post. And all of a sudden your coverage is just phenomenally bigger.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, your media lists are still critical. You still got to know who's doing what. Um, I say the sorrow of social is you also got to know their dog's name, what they drank last night. You know, that's the reality. And then who they're traveling with quite often,
Yeah.
right? Because you'll see press traveling with other press, and then yeah, it's a trip. It's a trip.
Well, it's got to be. I mean, do you think it's harder now? Is it harder than now than it was when you started?
Yeah. But I think it's yes, it's more difficult from a comprehension point of view to be across it all.
Yeah.
But I think that's always an opportunity to really hone on who are the right press for you, who are
Yeah.
the right press for your story. There are some writers, you know, if I've represented a $500 Brunello, there are some writers who just don't write about that.
Right.
Right. So your segmentation is critical. And managing access is critical on both
Yeah.
sides. And particularly, I spent a lot of years working with wineries with no brand budget, like
Yeah.
a pre-rep producer with $500 a year. I can't take them to Spain. Like I don't,
Right.
I don't have that access. So that stuff can get challenging. If you see coverage on a press trip that someone did, but you know for a fact your client was never going to be in there.
Yeah.
So I think it's more difficult, but I think it really forces you to be really good at what you do.
Well, I mean, it's like you're in the game, right? So with the game is like it's go time all the time. It's what it
Yeah.
feels like.
Yeah.
I want to get to a balanced class, but before that, now you moved to the US. How hard was that? Was that a tough move for you moving here?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think I had no comprehension of what I was getting into. And I think I'd obviously come from, I was group PR manager running global comms and industrial relations, et cetera, for an Australian producer globally. So I had, UK, Europe, Asia, Americas. But I had no comprehension of what it would be like to be in a vice president role in a large publicly traded beverage alcohol company. I'd do it again for sure, because I've had an extraordinary opportunity to learn and meet people and work in the world's largest media market. But yeah, it was rough. My dad came over 4 weeks after I got here, and I came home from work one day and he put like all my new Bose speakers in and he got me all these Australian treats from home because he was just like, you can do it, but right now, I just want to go home.
Where were you? Were you are you on the West Coast or on the?
Yeah, I was in San Francisco.
Okay.
Yeah. I was in service department on Lombard Street. But yeah, it was a big change. I'd come from living on the beach in Port Wollonga, having a marvelous time, to a very different world. But I think definitely one thing that saved me was Constellation had brought over a lot of Australians in leadership roles. So Ben Dollard, who's now Treasury, Nick Withers, who's now Huneus, Angus Lilly, who was here and went back, Sally Burton, who's at Jackson. So there was a good Aussie contingent. And particularly people like Sally and Sam, who's now at Phelps, they were like, you're going to do it. Like, you're going to be okay.
You weren't alone. You kind of had that support. You had a little bit of that support system from the hometown there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's good.
I learned how to love bagels. I'd never eaten bagels before when I got here.
Quick on the go, right?
You
have no time. So then I love that you went off on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a difficult. So I kind of can relate to that. It's not for everybody. People are always under that misconception. I don't care what industry you're in. You could oh, you've got your own business or you work for yourself. That's awesome, man. You can set your own hours. You go, no, you can't. Yeah, I tell you, my hours are I'm always working. So it's not for everybody, but how was that for you when you finally went off on your own?
So when I finished Constellation, I was heading back to Australia. I was done. And then Michael Mondavi offered me the opportunity to join Folio.
Yep.
And so I did 11 years with the Mondavis and Paolo and the team. Um, and I think that taught me a lot. That was a great reality check for how actually hard it is
Yeah.
when you don't have resources and you don't have budgets and you don't have departments and you got to figure it out. We used to say Folio was like the eternal startup. We were just constantly figuring things out. So I think when I went out on my own, you figure it out. And I think my struggle, and you, I'm sure, have had the same thing where you don't know how to not keep working.
Yeah.
You don't know how to find the off button because it's you. And you have, a reality of living in this country of financial requirements. So I think I've been on my own now officially like 3 years next month. And it's been a learning curve. I love it, but it's definitely different, yeah, it's you have to learn how to not work
Yeah.
all the time.
I struggle with it, and I've been at it for a while. I still struggle with it. There's this fear of like, for me anyway, of like, if I let take my eye off the ball, my foot off the gas, or whatever, whatever saying you want to use, is that I'm going to go back to having nothing,
Yeah.
and because you start off with kind of nothing, and there's no parachute, it's just
Yep.
you, and it's scary. And I think, even for us, I've been very lucky, very lucky. But 2024 was hard for us too. You know what I mean? And you kind of go, oh my God, is this the end? Like, what's
Yeah.
happening here? And but you just get up and you just keep going. And,
Yeah.
but it is a different thing. But that balance, and that's a good segue, to a balanced glass, is very difficult. So I want to talk a little bit about that, because I know that's a real passion for you.
Oh man, yeah, it is. So a balanced glass really started for selfish reasons. Um, I was at a conference in 2017, and it was all about kind of empowerment and career development, and it was a wine conference, but no one really talked about alcohol. And I'd been in these high pressure jobs and trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I realized there was nowhere for industry, right, for us to talk about a lot of the things that we were dealing with, facing, or, trying to figure out. And I wanted to create a space where talking about things that are important to us from a well-being point of view could be done. I personally had a meditation practice. Well, I have had one for 30 plus years. And I've had a yoga practice for many, many years. I don't know how many, 15, I think. And I still can't do a headstand. But it was kind of this place where I wanted us to be able to talk about physical health, mental health, and the challenges that we have. We work in a very unique industry where we have endless access to volume and frequency of alcohol. And that's just unique. In the tech industry, you can choose to engage with it or not. In the fashion industry, it's available, but really for us, it's in everything we do. And of course, then we have beautiful places to go and experience. So ABG is kind of the acronym that we use. So in 2018, I started this and had a wonderful opportunity to go and present at a conference and just talk about this topic. And I rang a journalist I'd become very good friends with called Kathy Hoyha. And she is a meditation teacher, is a yoga teacher. And we have our love language is herbal tea and yoga. That's kind of it. And we just started writing about the things, all the things that we hold dear as it relates to meditation, mindfulness, and moderation. And how do you keep it together in an industry that has lots of late nights, lots of demands away from family. And so it started to grow. and then COVID hit, of course, and really doubling down on helping people stuck at home, right? Hospitality professionals that were used to being on the floor or working, or winery salespeople used to being out on the road. So it really has been a labor of love. It's 7 years now. And the objective behind it always was for people to find a non-judgmental space that they could find a place to be themselves, and also to find things that might help them. Whether that's meditation, whether that's resources for alcohol use disorder, whether that's community groups that are supporting groups like United Sommelier Fund, acting as that conduit to help community connect. And it's amazing, I think there's about 2,000 people now. We write a bi-weekly newsletter. We profile people in the industry so they can tell their story. So, 2 weeks ago, I profiled Duncan Schuler from Gießen, talking about like, what's it like to make alcoholic and non-alcoholic wine, and then you get into like, how do you keep your life together? And he goes, well, I jump in a freezing cold pool and I sit on the bottom and hold my breath. I'm like, you're nuts. But it's amazing. And I heard Liz's interview, she's a transcendental meditation student. Like, discipline is really critical in this industry. If you're going to be a successful professional in any industry, but I think certainly in ours, you need to have a disciplined approach to your career, because, and you just got to make your choice. We have a lot of sober wine professionals, which I'm really proud of. I'm proud to have created a space where people who choose for their own reasons to not drink can feel like there's value in a balanced glass.
Yeah.
We've always said we're not the agony aunt, but we're there to help you, and if you want to connect with other people that are like you, then it's a good place. And I just, it's interesting because it's grown as part of that. I've been kind of studying the intersection of health and alcohol for 6 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been talking about the intersection of wine and health since 2020. And it's Felicity Carter and I were talking this morning. She's obviously the world leader in alcohol and health policy, in my mind, for our industry. And we presented in 2020 in Verona about the growth of, moderation and non-alc, and the concept of the misinformation around the topic. And it's giving me an opportunity now to talk a lot about low and no alcohol, particularly moderation in the younger consumers. And I think when you've spent your career in communications, you listen to a lot of people, like we said.
Yeah.
And so health is a very personal subject. And so you spend a lot of time having one-on-one conversations with people. And again, it's not about fixing, it's about giving them space. And the no and low and moderation is a huge topic in the younger drinkers. The intersection of, mental health, right? Mental health and alcohol, or being seen to drink, being filmed. I mean, the LDAs, young adults these days, have so much more to contend with that older drinkers just never had.
Yeah.
So I would spend a lot of time on that. I write a bit about non-alcohol and non-alcoholic category, because I think it's really important as an industry. It's really important that we understand it, that, again, you don't have to go and make it. That's not what this is about. And this also isn't about prohibitionism or temperance movements. It's really about being part of a community that really has a discipline in it, loves wine, but is very aware of, what we do. And I tell you, George, it's not sexy. Lots of people don't want to talk about this stuff. And I'm okay with that too.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I mean, as you were speaking, I literally looked to my left here. I think there's probably like 4 cases of wine in my office that you just accumulate. And there's a few bottles of whiskey and some tequila. I mean, there's just,
You're a lucky guy.
I know, but 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 we've all seen, we all have experienced and seen people who let it get away from them,
Yeah.
and good people.
Yeah.
Because it's just, it's like, to your point earlier, it's, we're unique, our industry is a little bit unique in that we just have such easy access to,
Yeah.
just, it's never ending, right? And
Yeah.
it can get away from you. But
Yeah.
I love the idea, I love the concept, I'd like that you work the balance in there, right? Because it is about finding that balance, and that healthy lifestyle, being able to incorporate a healthy lifestyle into what we do, because it's, otherwise you just can't, you never make it.
Yeah, and also I think it's a very personal perspective. And that's why a lot of these kind of prescriptive concepts that are kind of flying around, they're just, they're not realistic. And I don't think they're always, yes, of course, there's this, it's a whole world of anti-alcohol, World Health Organization and warnings and things that is not my specialty at all.
Yeah.
But it can be, I think it's about intentionality and it's about mindfulness. And mindfulness doesn't mean sitting on a yoga mat on a mountain. Like mindfulness is about like engaging with people. Like how intentional are you? Are you making the right decisions? Are you doing decisions with integrity? Are you standing by what you say?
Yeah.
And so it's important to me. And I will say, again, working, for Michael Mondavi for 11 years, who is still boxing at 6 a.m. 3 times a week,
Yeah.
plus 80 years old. I mean, when you can see someone like that and you're modeled, and this is one thing I think I want to see more of in the industry, is the modeling of the behavior, rather than it being weird. I want it to be the norm, because I think we have such bright people that come into our industry, and I really believe they need long-term success and they deserve long-term success. I've mentored a lot of young women through the Batonage Forum, and a lot of it is about just keeping them with a self-care program that gets them looking after themselves so they can show up. So you can show up, I can show up, and we can do great work.
Well, I think as we continue to bring in, like, younger industry professionals, I think they're open to this sort of thinking. I think it's just something that's more inherent to them, something that they've grown up with, this type of thinking.
Yeah.
You said so for people that are interested, is it just you can subscribe to a balance class?
And just go to abalanceglass.com.
Okay.
On the website and all the thing. There's join the community. Every 2 weeks, there's a newsletter that you'll get, and it'll have a story. It'll have a profile on someone in the industry. It'll have, we call it day off drinks, but it'll be something non-alcoholic that we're drinking. And that's not just a de-alcohol product. It could be tea, it could be kombucha, it could be anything. But it's flavorsome and it's good, And then we talk a bit about who's writing about what. There's always good topics.
Yeah.
And then the website has 7 years of articles. And it's everything from jet lag to managing stress during harvest to, goodness, one of the most popular ones is by a writer out of France. It was called How to Drink Like a French Woman.
Okay.
It's kind of like the why French women don't get fat thing. We review a lot of non-alc product. I think in the last 5 years, I've tasted a ton of non-alcohol product across the spectrum.
They're getting better too, right? They're getting better.
100%. I mean, this is the most exciting time. And again, yesterday I was with Rachel Martin, who is Oceano Wines, who made full strength, we call them full strength, quarter proof, so a 3% Syrah and a non-alc. Okay. And a gentleman called Josh Garber from Summerlin Wines, and he makes zeros, Pinot Noir and a Chardonnay, single vineyard, single vintage, single variety.
Yeah.
Great wine. And we know the technology is there. It hasn't caught up yet at a premium price point, but it uses the same infrastructure as the industry already uses.
Yeah.
Like, it's the global brands. And when brands like French Bloom, right, which is owned by the Taittinger family, just invested in by LVMH, there's a market. I think the market will right size like anything. It's a nascent space. There's 1,000 new products. So there will be a lot that won't survive, but it's like any market. But yeah, it's cool. There's some good stuff going on.
No, we're excited about it too. You know, of course, we work closely with like the Bev Zeros and the Sobos of the world that are you know, making it more accessible to brands that can't afford you know, to put in their own sort of systems. But I agree with you. I think it's an exciting time, and I don't think it's anything for us to be afraid of as an industry. I think it's a good accompaniment to what we already have. And we should be embracing the opportunity.
Well, and I'd rather see a non-alc wine on a wine list than a non-alc beer.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I mean, if you know, and I think that's something that we, as an industry, we need to embrace it. And at the DTC symposium, we talked about this, and it's like, this isn't a category you have to master. You do need to know about it, because your reps need to know about it, your makers need to know about it, you know. And there's grapes out there that could be opportunistically used right now.
Absolutely. No, there's no question about it.
Yeah.
Are you in Monterey, Ned? Were you in Monterey?
Yeah, I just got back last night. Yep.
Yeah. How was it for you?
It was great. I mean, the symposium is a really important event, right? Because to your point, there's the vendors, technology's changing. And it was good to hear perspectives from, you know, large producers and very, very small producers talking about the challenges, talking about, you know, I sat in one system on email marketing and realized how bad my ABG newsletter is and how I'm not a very good email marketer. But the room was full, and there was just tons of interest and discussion. And I think that's one thing about wine people, is we always want to learn. Yeah. You know.
And we're not afraid to teach each other and share with each other our experiences, because, I mean, it's a cliche, but it is, we are very much an all ships rise with the tide situation. And when it's going down, we all feel that pain as well. So it's, it's one of the things I love about the vendor side, not so much of our industry. They're pretty competitive. I work with those guys pretty much. But on the winery side, that's one of the things I absolutely love about just the way it works, you know. And the winery associations are a great example of how we can come together, even though we may be competing for a spot on the shelf or a spot on the wine list, to promote our region or promote a particular varietal. So I love that. Well, I've really enjoyed chatting with you a little bit. Super interesting. As I can go for another hour with you, easy peasy. But for people that want to get in touch with you, what's the website?
abalancedglass.com is the easy one. Or Rebecca Hopkins Wine, but I'm all over social as Beck Hopkins Wine, BECK HOPKINS, or A Balanced Glass.
Great. Well, listen,
that's me.
I love chatting with you, and you made me think about, like, maybe for one of these future things that I'm working on is to, you know, maybe, I know you've done it in other places, but maybe have you come up and talk a little bit about A Balanced Glass and share some stories, or have some of your, you know, some of the your favorite people come up and share some of their stories and their advice, because that kind of advice isn't something that is going to go, you know, there's never going to be a lack of need for that in our industry. So I love that you're doing it, and I can tell it's something that you're passionate about. So
love it.
Congratulations.
Thank you, George. It was awesome to talk to you. Have a great weekend.
You too, Rebecca. Thank you. And thanks everybody for watching with us today. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, like our YouTube channel, and stay tuned for more insider interviews to come.
Awesome. Have a great weekend.
Hey, thank you, Rebecca.
Thanks.